Kyle Morgan was on the Cleared Hot podcast with Andy Stumpf, and they talked for about 3 hours. If you want to watch that whole podcast, go over there and do that. But I have just taken clips of that podcast to discuss here on this channel, as those things are relevant to the topics that we typically discuss on this channel.
The whole dynamic versus deliberate thing, it bothers me because people like, they've now, and this is something that I was taught too. It's not like I've just, in reflection, I've been like, man, all CQB is dynamic. It's just how dynamic is the environment.
You do the same shit, just
and
faster.
It's all deliberate, if you're being honest with yourself, because deliberate doesn't mean slow. Deliberate means intentional. It means predictable. It means in control of the throttle.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So,
it's the same stuff applied generally faster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And because in lieu of cover or even concealment of these drywall walls that we're hiding behind, doing all these things, the enemy doesn't have to discriminate. They can shoot through those, and maybe you just haven't been challenged yet.
I understand what Kyle is getting at here. This is the second time I've heard him say this about dynamic and deliberate. The issue is that dynamic and deliberate are two different terms that are not used interchangeably to describe the same thing. So when we talk about dynamic or deliberate, we are quite literally talking about how fast we should be clearing a structure. So when you hear people debating dynamic or deliberate, it's not that the fundamental principles of CQB change or angles of exposure or angles of attack change. The question that people are asking and trying to answer is simply, how fast should we be clearing this structure?
And you're like, we have to do this. When someone tells me, a tactical team tells me, we have to do this a certain way, I'm like, guys, you don't have to do anything. What's the mission? That's what you have. What's the no-fail mission?
This is something that we talk about pretty often on the channel, and that is intelligently applied tactics. The right tactic at the right time for the right reasons. The mission dictates our tactics. If it's a hostage rescue and it's time to launch that rescue, well, then we're going to move dynamically through the structure to clear the structure as quickly as possible and get to the hostages. If it isn't a hostage rescue, then where do we fall on the priority of life scale? And do we need to be taking on unnecessary amounts of risk to accomplish that mission?
And what's happening across our country is that you have SWAT teams, and this is a broad statement, that are being challenged in their operational environments with high-risk search warrants and arrest warrants, and then an occasional, domestic that turns into a hostage situation that negotiations fail. They do a crisis entry, but they don't train. They don't train to the no-fail mission. They train to the operational mission, because they're more operational than they are training. Whereas where we worked, we were more training than operational.
For sure.
Like if you look at the bigger numbers, like we trained way more than we did operations versus
orders of magnitude. Orders of magnitude.
Yeah.
So I think what he's saying here is that SWAT teams are not training to the no-fail mission because they're simply not training more than they are actually operational. And I would say that that's probably true. But on the flip side of that, SWAT teams are also asked to operationally conduct more missions or arrive on more scenarios that are not the no-fail mission. And so, yes, they do train to the no-fail mission, but there's also a number of other situations and circumstances and tasks that SWAT guys have to train for that don't necessarily correlate directly to the no-fail mission. And I would also, in addition to what he's saying, say that there's probably a lot of teams out there, SWAT teams, that are doing operations that they don't necessarily need to be doing, or that a SWAT team isn't necessarily needed for. And that's for a number of different reasons. But one of those reasons is that, SWAT teams want to get reps in too, right? And so let's just say, for example, you have a guy with a murder warrant. Well, your average tactical team goes after guys with murder warrants all the time. But your SWAT team might be asked or given, or, hey, I got this guy, do you guys want to do this? And they'll say, yeah, we'll do that. And it isn't necessarily because, well, this murder was more violent or this guy's known to carry guns, because I'm telling you that tactical team guys go after people of the same, lethality as SWAT teams do. And there was actually one incident that I covered on the channel, I think I covered it here, where, a SWAT team was used I think it was to take down a guy who had a murder warrant. They jump out of their cars, they give him commands. The guy reaches behind his back, I think he'd pull out a cell phone, and the SWAT guy shoots him and he goes down and dies. And one of the consequences of, just the command looking at that was like, our use of SWAT is going to now be more restricted to situations where, they're absolutely needed, or we feel like we need their skill set to complete this task. And the good thing about that, again, this is adding on to what he's saying, is that if you are not operational more than you actually have the ability to train, well, now you can actually train more, just like they do or did, for that no-fail operational mission.
I want to increase your ability to process a tactical, a close quarters battle environment. Remember, there's a battle. It's a battle for morality. So understand, it's either a corner fed entry or a center fed.
Now he's talking about increase your ability to process information, and he's not particularly in this case talking about the speed at which you're moving, but I am going to utilize what he's saying because one of the things that I talk about often on the channel is processing speed and your ability to process. And in a CQB environment, the only way that you can guarantee that you're going to have the ability to process things, you know, to the max level is if you give yourself time, right, to process what it is you're seeing and how you're going to react and respond to that. And the example that I've used is just approaching a threshold. And I've covered this many times in some shorts and on Instagram and things like that, where the speed at which you approach the threshold is inherently going to dictate your ability to process what you're seeing inside the room. And so if you're taking a positive step to the center, you know, a center step, well, then when you do that, there's a portion of the room that you're giving up that you're just not going to be able to see and respond to. And that might be something that you're choosing to do because you're prioritizing speed of getting in the room, and that's okay. But I'm just pointing out here that the faster you move, the less time you have to process it is, you know, what you're seeing and what you're exposing yourself to. And it's not as if that 0.25 to 0.35 seconds of your ability to see something, make a decision, and react changes, right? That stays relatively the same and is dependent on the individual, of course. But the moment or the opportunity that you have to make that decision in a CQB environment begins to change because the amount of time that you're exposing yourself to these angles of exposure, depending on how fast you're moving, does change and does affect your ability to process information.
How do we determine those? There's a human-sized void to one side beyond that threshold, corner fed. If there's a human-sized void to both sides beyond that threshold, center fed. Yeah. Why does that matter? For strong-wall teams, it doesn't, but ask a strong-wall team how they strong-wall a corner fed room. And I haven't seen it done yet. Yeah. So they do points of domination. They just don't want to say it. They just don't go all the way to the corners. And what we teach is you don't have to. The room, once you open the door, you're processing the same things. Whether you take and make the L, making an L is important. Yep. If there's dead space in the room, which is a void, a human-sized void in depth of the room.
This is a picture of the strong wall technique and making an L inside a room. And he says that making an L inside a room is important because it helps you clear dead space. And that is true. It does help you do that. But I would actually argue that that's the least important aspect of creating an L in a room, because even if you create an L in a room, there still at times is dead space that you need to clear. So whether you're strong walling or you're making an L, the dead space, as long as you're covering that space to the best of your ability where you can from where you're standing, that's fine. We are going to move inside the room additionally to clear that dead space. When you're clearing that dead space may not be of the most important, but creating an L inside the room is also important because you will have the ability and the opportunity to divide the suspect's attention. So if you're strong walling inside of a room, well, the suspect has to do less work to shoot more of you. And if you're creating an L inside of the room, well, now he has to kind of traverse himself if he wants to shoot multiple people, and that's going to be pretty much impossible for him to do by the time he's being shot. The other important aspect of creating an L inside the room is that now you are going to see things from a different perspective. So each operator, each officer inside the room is going to have a different perspective of the suspect and his actions based on where they're standing. So if you strong wall inside the room, everyone kind of is going to have pretty much the same perspective. And if you make an L inside the room, well, now you're increasing the likelihood and the ability that one officer is going to see something that another officer doesn't, which is going to increase your reaction time. So the suspect's moving towards a gun on a table, or he's turned around and he's reaching inside of his waistline for a handgun. You're going to have more of an ability to see that and make those decisions if you are creating an L inside the room.
I just try to simplify it. And I don't speak from this like, why is this so hard? It's just like, my job is to simplify these environments because the enemy, the unknown floor plans, like, and then the ability to train everywhere you go, instead of being like, well, we don't get the resources. Man, read doors. Yeah. Like, you're on a patrol partner zones, like you get to do a building search. They get access to places that none of us do.
All the time.
All the time.
So one of the things that I had been thinking about is, and I've said this before, that CQB is not hard to do. It is not overly complicated. But then I was kind of reflecting myself after seeing some things online and asking myself, well, at what level is it more complicated than what it's being presented as, right? And so like, if you're just like, there's an open door and you just, walk into the room kind of, not really executing the fundamentals of CQB, and it's like, well, it's not that simple, right? It's a little bit more complicated than that. If you're gonna open a door and stand directly in front of the door and then take the room, it's like, well, okay, I think like that is very simple, but it's maybe just a little bit more complicated than that. None of it difficult, none of it hard to do, none of it even difficult to become pretty good at in a limited amount of time if you have, enough common sense and the will to actually get better.
People talk about CQB IQ and the art side of it and all that. It's problem solving. But the IQ piece, I think, comes from knowing what to look for, because because all these other weapons handling skills, all the stuff that we do on the range has to be done ad nauseum. So everything else, because guys don't get to do live fire CQB. I did that every day.
Yeah.
On the range and in the house. Everything, we'd use sims for force on force to pressure test, larger scale things. But that's okay. I don't get to do that anymore. And so how do we maximize the training environments that we have? And it's knowing what to look for or how to free your bandwidth up so things are running in the background.
So this is what training and experience is. This is the value that it provides you, and it is the ability to make heuristic decisions, making quick decisions with limited information. And I would also say that you have the ability to make quick decisions with limited information that have positive outcomes, or that you reflect on and say, that was a good decision. So just like approaching a door, setting up on a door, opening the door, working the door, conducting your threshold assessment, taking the room, adjusting yourself as you're moving down the hallway to, the right side of the room because you see an open door and that's going to be the next room that you take. All of these things are happening based off what you're seeing. But in order for you to be capable of doing that, you have to have a lot of training and experience so that you know what to look for. And when you know what to look for and you know what you're doing, well, now you can spend more time focusing on the things that are most important in that moment versus having to worry about these other things that you shouldn't be worrying about.
I didn't stop fighting, but I missed several rounds, and that I don't miss. Like that's the part where it's like,
you should be ashamed of yourself.
I know, but I know we joke around about it, but it's like if I can't account for a shot, I don't need to do this job. Like everything,
that's one
we get
way
paid to not take the shot.
Sure, that's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is a guy had an AK shoved in your face, and you were doing the best that you could.
In this clip, Kyle's talking about his intervention at the Radisson Blu Hotel, the terrorist attack, and he's basically saying, I was climbing the stairs, bad guy was coming down, he was pointing his AK at me, I was looking at his muzzle, he cracked off a round, he's not sure exactly where that round went, and then he engaged this bad guy with 7 rounds and he missed all of them. Obviously, he's going to be harder on himself than anybody else, would be on him. That's because we should be our biggest critic. And the reason that I have this clip in here is because something that I've talked about frequently is every person at every skill level, the opportunity for failure is there. Nobody is perfect, and there's a good chance nobody will be perfect, although it can happen in a real situation. And just one of the things that I see online is that there's a lot of people out there who present themselves as if they are perfect individuals, as if they can't fail. And a lot of times this seems to be associated with someone's ability to, be fast and accurate on the range. Well, the problem with the range is that, yes, it is the place where you will, learn to apply the fundamentals of marksmanship, as fast and accurately as possible. And it's the only place that you can do that. But there is also that, and then there's, what you're faced with in reality and how those two, match up with one another. And a lot of times in real life, the situations that we're involved in, they're more dynamic, they're more fluid, they demand more out of you. And just because you can demonstrate speed and accuracy on the range doesn't necessarily mean that that is going to translate into a real life scenario.